My parents left me to die in an earthquake at 6 to save my brother 20 years later. They begged me. The concrete crushing my left arm hurt so badly I couldn't stop screaming. But that wasn't the pain I carried for the next 20 years. That came from watching my mother look straight at me and choose my brother. I was 6 years old. Dust coated my tongue. Something warm ran down the side of my face, and my left hand had already gone numb beneath the slab, pinning me to what had once been the floor of our apartment building. A few feet away, somewhere beyond a broken section of wall, my 9-year-old brother Owen was crying too. "Mom!" I screamed. My voice came back to me strangely beneath the rubble. "Mom, please, I'm scared." I could see only pieces of the world through the gap above me, gray daylight, boots moving over broken concrete, the yellow stripe on a firefighter's jacket. Then a rescuer shouted, "We've got both kids under the same section." Someone else yelled back that the slab had shifted. The man closest to me crouched low enough that I could see part of his face through the dust. "Naomi, sweetheart, don't move. Can you hear me?" I nodded, even though he probably couldn't see it. "I want my mom." "I know." Metal scraped somewhere overhead. Then his expression changed. He stood and shouted toward my parents. "We can shore up one side first. Once we lift it, the load could shift onto the other pocket. We may not have enough time to get back before it collapses." There was a pause. Even at 6, I understood enough. Not all the engineering. Not the weight. Not what load shift meant. I understood the part that mattered. One of us was going first, and the other one might not still be alive when they came back. I started screaming again. "Mom, Mom, please." My mother stepped close enough that I saw her shoes through the opening. Brown leather flats. One of the buckles was missing. For years afterward, I could remember those shoes more clearly than I could remember her face. "Which side?" the rescuer demanded. "We need a decision now." I waited for my parents to refuse. I waited for my father to say, "You find a way to get both of them." I waited for my mother to crawl into the rubble herself if she had to. Instead, she said, "Save Owen." It happened so quickly I thought I had heard wrong. My father said her name. "Patricia. Save our son." Her voice cracked, but she didn't change the words. Then she looked toward the opening where I was trapped. For 1 second, I thought she was going to take it back. Instead, she said, "A daughter is useless anyway. Get our son out." Something inside me went completely still. Not the concrete. Not the sirens. Mom? She turned away. That was the moment I remembered. Not the slab. Not my arm. Not even the terror. Her turning away. The rescuers started working on Owen's side. Someone yelled for another brace. Metal hammered against concrete. Owen was screaming something. I could hear my name. Or maybe I only wanted to. Then the slab above me groaned. A sound so deep I felt it through my ribs. Dust poured into my face. The pocket around my body tightened. "Mom." No answer. "Dad." I screamed until my throat felt torn open. Their voices moved farther away. Then I heard cheering. They had Owen. A few seconds later, something above my shoulder dropped hard enough to knock the air out of me. The light disappeared. And I understood, with the simple certainty only a terrified child can have, that my parents had taken my brother and left me there to die. I don't know how long I was under that building. As a child, I remembered it as forever. Later, I learned it was a little over 4 hours before another rescue crew reached the section where I was trapped. A twisted steel support had buckled instead of snapping. It held part of the slab just high enough to leave a pocket around my chest. Not much. Enough. I remember a man's voice telling me to keep my eyes open. I remember someone touching my cheek. I remember asking one question over and over while they worked. "Is my mom coming back?" Nobody answered the first time. Or the second. When they finally pulled me into daylight, the first familiar face I saw belonged to my Aunt Rachel. Not my mother. Not my father. Rachel. She was kneeling beside a stretcher, crying so hard she had both hands over her mouth. I looked past her. "Where's Mom?" Rachel wiped her face quickly. "She's with Owen right now." I waited. Even while the paramedics worked around me, I waited. "Is she coming?" Rachel took my uninjured hand. "I'm here, sweetheart." That wasn't what I had asked, but it was the answer I got. At 6 years old, I still believed right now meant temporary. I didn't understand that sometimes adults could build an entire life out of something they first described as temporary. My parents stayed with Owen through his recovery. I stayed with Rachel through mine. First because it was easier. Then because I needed physical therapy. Then because Patricia said switching homes again would be too disruptive. By the time anyone stopped pretending the arrangement was temporary, Rachel's house was where my school bag sat by the door. It was where my medication lived. It was where someone waited for me after therapy. My mother called. My father visited sometimes. Owen existed mostly as a name I learned not to ask about. And eventually, everybody discovered a softer way to describe what had happened. My parents hadn't chosen him. They had made an impossible decision. They hadn't abandoned me. They had trusted the rescuers. They hadn't stayed away afterward. They had been trying not to re-traumatize me. There was always a better phrase available. One that hurt less when adults said it. None of them changed what I remembered. My mother's shoes turning away. 20 years later, I made a living helping people rebuild the parts of their lives an injury had interrupted. I became an occupational therapist because I understood something early that most people didn't learn until they lost it. Independence wasn't dramatic. It was buttoning your own shirt, making coffee without asking for help, getting yourself into the shower safely, driving again, opening a jar, choosing when someone touched you, choosing when they didn't. On the Tuesday my parents came back into my life, I was working with a man named Mr. Callahan, who had spent the previous 7 weeks recovering from a stroke. His daughter hovered beside him while he tried to pull a sweatshirt over his head. "Dad, let me." She reached for the fabric. I gently held up a hand. "Give him a second. He's struggling." "I know." Mr. Callahan's jaw tightened. His left arm moved slowly, but it moved. His daughter shifted impatiently beside me. "He's going to get frustrated." "He's allowed to." She looked at me. I nodded toward her father. "If he can safely do part of it himself, let him do it. Helping isn't the same thing as taking over." Mr. Callahan finally got his arm through the sleeve. His daughter laughed. He looked exhausted, but proud. "There," I said. He gave me a crooked smile. "Stubborn old man wins again. Occupational therapy's greatest success story." He laughed. So did his daughter. My phone vibrated inside the pocket of my scrub jacket. Once, then again. By the time I finished the session, there were 12 missed calls. I almost assumed something had happened to Rachel. Then I saw the name. Mom. My thumb stopped above the screen. Patricia and I weren't technically no contact. We had simply reached the sort of relationship where months could pass without either of us testing whether there was anything left to say. Birthdays got short texts. Christmas sometimes got a card. She called when a relative died. I called once when Daniel had minor surgery. That was the shape of our family now. Polite enough for outsiders. Empty enough to survive. 12 missed calls wasn't polite. I listened to the first voicemail in my car. "Naomi, call me. It's Owen." I sat very still. There were 20 years inside those 3 words. The second message was from my father. "Your brother had an accident at work. He's stable. Don't panic. Your mother just wants to talk." I almost laughed. Don't panic. As if panic was the problem my family had ever had with me. I called Rachel first. She hadn't heard anything. Then I sat behind the steering wheel for another minute before deciding I wasn't going to spend my evening waiting for Patricia to decide what information I deserved. I drove home. Their car was already parked outside my duplex. Of course it was. My mother stood the moment I came through the gate. Naomi. She looked older than the woman I kept frozen in my head. More gray in her hair. Smaller somehow. Daniel stood beside her with both hands in his coat pockets. I unlocked the front door but didn't invite them in. "What happened?" "Owen fell at a job site yesterday." Patricia stepped closer. "He fractured his wrist and his leg. Surgery went well, but he can't drive. He can barely get around by himself." My stomach tightened, despite myself. "Is he okay?" "Yes," Daniel said quickly. "Nothing life-threatening." I hated the relief that moved through me. Not because I wanted Owen hurt. Because some 6-year-old part of me still resented that I could care whether he lived. Patricia looked past my shoulder into my house. "He'll need help for 6, maybe 8 weeks." I nodded. "Okay." She waited. So did Daniel. I knew that silence. It was the same kind my family had always used when they had already decided what I was supposed to volunteer. I folded my arms. What? Patricia blinked. What do you mean? What? What are you asking me? Her expression softened with something that looked almost like pity. Naomi, you're an occupational therapist. There it was. Not you're his sister. Not yet. First came usefulness. This is what you do. At work, you help people recover. Yes. And you have a ground floor place. My eyes narrowed. She continued before I could speak. The second bedroom would be perfect. No stairs. Your bathroom is already easy to access. I stared at her. She had been inside my home twice. The last time was nearly 3 years earlier. Somehow, she still knew exactly what my spare room could provide her son. You've already thought this through. We had to. No. You decided to. Daniel exhaled. Naomi, nobody is deciding anything for you. I looked at him. Then why are you describing where he'll sleep? Patricia's mouth tightened. Owen needs family. There it was. The second tool. My profession hadn't worked, so now came blood. You're his sister. I felt something old move beneath my ribs. A reflex. An apology trying to form before I had done anything wrong. I swallowed it. I can help you understand what support he may need. Patricia nodded quickly. Good. I'm not agreeing to move him into my house. Her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A slight withdrawal, as if I had handed back a gift she had already opened. Naomi, I haven't spoken to Owen in years. He needs you. Did he say that? She hesitated. So briefly, Daniel probably didn't notice. I did. Yes. My heart gave one hard beat. What exactly did he say? Why does that matter? Because you just told me Owen asked for me. He knows you're the best person to help. That isn't what I asked. Daniel rubbed a hand over his forehead. Please don't turn this into the earthquake. I looked at him. I hadn't mentioned the earthquake. Not once. The three of us stood in the pale porch light. 20 years disappeared for half a second. I was 6 again. Dust in my mouth. Adults deciding what my life was worth while I listened. Except this time I wasn't trapped. I had keys in my hand. A job. A lease with my name on it. A door I controlled. I looked at Patricia. I'll look at the kind of support he needs. That is all I'm agreeing to. But that is all. Her eyes filled. She had always been able to cry without raising her voice. It made everyone else feel cruel. After everything that family has been through, I thought maybe this could finally bring you two back together. For one dangerous second, I wanted to believe her. That was the embarrassing part. At 26, after therapy, education, distance, and 20 years of evidence, some piece of me still wanted my mother to hand me a reason why I had never mattered as much, and have that reason somehow make sense. I tightened my fingers around my keys. Good night. Daniel stared at me. Patricia looked wounded. I went inside anyway. Then I locked the door. My hand shook afterward, but I locked it. I slept badly. At 7:30 the next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and a yellow legal pad. It was a habit I had picked up from work. When a family was overwhelmed, I separated the problem into categories. What does the person actually need? What support already exists? What is temporary? What requires consent? I wrote 3 simpler headings. What Owen needs. Blank. What my parents want. My home. My time. My profession. My spare room. Then, what I agreed to. I stared at that column. Nothing. My phone rang. Unknown local number. I nearly ignored it. Then I answered. Naomi Reed? Yes. Hi, Miss Reed. My name is Marisol Vega. I'm part of the care coordination team working with Owen Reed. Every muscle in my shoulders tightened. Okay. I'm calling to confirm the discharge arrangement your family provided. I put down my coffee. What arrangement? A pause. We were told Mr. Reed would likely recover at your residence, and that you're an occupational therapist who can provide informal support. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything, except the refrigerator humming behind me. My mother had already done it. She had turned my maybe into a yes. My profession into consent. My house into family property. I did not agree to that. Marisol's tone changed immediately. All right. Thank you for clarifying. I haven't agreed to housing, supervision, or therapy. Understood. We won't document your home as the discharge destination without confirmation from you and Mr. Reed. Something about the sentence hit me harder than it should have. Without confirmation from you. A stranger understood my permission mattered. My own mother had never bothered to ask. I'd like that corrected in writing. Absolutely. I opened my laptop while we spoke. Marisol explained only what she could appropriately discuss without Owen's authorization. His care team was considering several possibilities depending on his mobility, insurance coverage, and what Owen himself preferred. Several. Not one. Not me. I can send you a brief note confirming you have not agreed to provide care, she said. Please do. I typed my own email as soon as we disconnected. Short. Factual. No history. No accusation. I have not agreed to provide housing, supervision, transportation, or rehabilitation services for Owen Reed. Please do not list my residence as a discharge destination without my explicit consent. I read it twice, then sent it. My hands were cold, but steady. The phone rang again before I finished my coffee. Marisol, I just wanted to clarify one more thing. Yes? There was a slight pause. For what it's worth, Mr. Reed seemed surprised yesterday when your mother mentioned staying with you. I sat back. What do you mean? I can't speak for him. You'd have to ask him directly. Directly. The word stayed with me after the call ended. For 20 years, everything Owen supposedly thought about me had arrived through somebody else. Owen doesn't want to see you. Owen needs space. Owen thinks you blame him. Owen has moved on. I opened my contacts. His name was still there. Owen Reed. I had changed phones 4 times since college. Somehow I had never deleted it. My thumb hovered over the number. At 6 years old, adults had made the biggest decision of my life, while I screamed from beneath concrete. At 26, my mother was already trying to make another one before I had even spoken to the person at the center of it. Not this time. I pressed call. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then the line clicked. For the first time in years, I heard my brother's voice. Naomi. My parents left me to die in an earthquake at 6 to save my brother 20 years later. They begged me. Naomi? For a second, neither of us said anything. His voice was deeper than the one preserved in my memory, but there was something underneath it I recognized anyway. A slight roughness at the end of my name. Owen had sounded like that when we were children, and he was trying not to cry. My grip tightened around the phone. Yeah. Another pause. Then, cautiously, Mom said you didn't want to talk to me. The legal pad on my kitchen table suddenly seemed brighter than everything around it. What? She called this morning. His words came slower now. She said you were upset about the discharge plan and that you didn't want me calling you directly. A faint pressure started behind my ribs. That's not what she told me. What did she tell you? She said you asked for me. The line went quiet. Not disconnected. Just quiet. When Owen spoke again, his voice had changed. I didn't. 4 words. 20 years cracked down the middle. You didn't ask to stay here? No. You didn't ask her to call me? No. My gaze dropped to the 3 columns on the yellow pad. What Owen needed. What my parents wanted. What I had agreed to. That last column was still empty. So why? I asked. Does the hospital have my address? I don't know. A hard laugh escaped me before I could stop it. You don't know. I'm serious. You're 29 years old. And I'm sitting in a hospital bed with one leg I can't put weight on and a wrist that's basically decorative right now. I've had people asking me where I'm going after discharge since yesterday. Mom told them she was handling it. There it was. The phrase I had grown up around. Handling it. Patricia handled birthdays. Patricia handled explanations. Patricia handled why Owen wasn't at Rachel's house when I was recovering. Patricia handled why I shouldn't call him. Apparently, she was still handling people. Did you tell her I could be your plan? No. Did you tell her you wanted to recover at my place? No. Did you tell her you didn't want me involved? Owen hesitated. The pause was small. Still, I caught it. What? She told me you'd already said no. Something in my chest went very still. When? Last night. My parents were standing outside my house last night telling me you wanted me. Another silence. This one felt different. The refrigerator motor clicked off behind me, leaving my kitchen unnaturally quiet. Owen finally said, "That doesn't make any sense." No. Maybe she misunderstood. The old reflex came so quickly I almost missed it. Of course. Maybe Mom misunderstood. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe 20 years of my life could be explained by people repeatedly misunderstanding in exactly the same direction. Did she misunderstand when she gave them my address? His breathing shifted over the line. I didn't know she did that. I stared at the email I had sent Marisol. You didn't even know where I lived, did you? No. That answer hurt more than I expected. Not because he should have known. Because Patricia had known. My mother had remembered the layout of a home she barely visited well enough to assign my spare room to her son, while her son hadn't even known whether I still lived there. Owen exhaled. Look, I'm injured, Naomi. I'm exhausted. I really don't have the energy for whatever this is, between you and Mom. There he was, not a misunderstood little boy. Not an innocent victim. My brother. Still willing to push discomfort back toward the person who had carried it longest. Then don't. What? Don't have the energy for it. That's not what I meant. You don't have to solve anything today. But I called you for one reason. I needed to know whether you asked for my house. I didn't. Good. Then from now on, if something involves my home or my time, you ask me, not Mom. His response came after a beat. Okay. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was the first agreement between my brother and me that hadn't passed through our parents in years. Before hanging up, Owen said, Naomi? Yeah? I didn't know you still had the same number. Neither had I known he did. After the call, the coffee had gone lukewarm. I didn't reheat it. Instead, I opened the email Marisol had sent confirming that my home would not be treated as a discharge destination without my agreement. I saved a copy in a folder on my personal laptop, not because I was preparing for war, because facts had already started changing depending on who was speaking. At work, I told families all the time that memory became unreliable under stress. People heard half a sentence, filled in a gap, remembered an intention instead of an action. That was exactly why documentation existed. By noon, Owen had emailed me. The subject line was simply, options. He had copied Marisol. His message was short. She said you offered to help me understand what choices I have. If that's still true, I'd appreciate it. I'm not asking to stay with you. I read the last sentence twice, then replied, that offer stands. I can help you understand the practical options. I cannot be your therapist, and I'm not agreeing to provide housing or daily care. If you're okay with those limits, I'll help you make a list of questions for your care team. His answer came 6 minutes later. Okay. No guilt. No, but we're family. No demand. The absence of those things felt almost suspicious. During my lunch break, Owen called with Marisol on the line after giving permission for her to discuss the basic discharge needs with me. The situation was inconvenient. It was not impossible. He would need a safe place to stay while he couldn't manage stairs easily, transportation for follow-up appointments, help with some daily tasks until his wrist improved. A mobility setup that didn't require him to balance on one leg while using the injured arm. What he did not need was me. Not specifically. That mattered. Marisol outlined several possibilities depending on what his insurance authorized and how his mobility progressed before discharge. Short-term rehabilitation was one possibility. A modified setup at our parents' house could work if certain practical issues were addressed. Paid assistance combined with outpatient therapy might cover the gaps. So could a temporary accessible rental, depending on availability. I wrote each option down. Then I asked Owen directly, "What do you want?" He took a moment. "I don't know yet." That's allowed. Patricia would have hated that answer. For her, uncertainty had always been an empty space she rushed to fill. Think about what you can realistically do, I said. Not what Mom says you should do, not what I could theoretically do for you. A small sound came through the phone. Almost a laugh. You always talk like this. Like what? Like everything needs categories. Only when everyone else is calling chaos a plan. Marisol chuckled softly. then returned to scheduling. When the call ended, I emailed Owen the questions we had discussed. Only Owen. Not my parents. That choice felt minor enough to be ridiculous. It also felt enormous. My phone lit up before the end of the workday. Patricia. I let it ring. She called again. Then came the text. Why are you confusing Owen when he's vulnerable? A second appeared before I finished reading the first. He specifically told us he didn't want old issues dragged into his recovery. My fingers hovered over the screen. That morning, Owen had told me he didn't want to deal with the conflict. That was true. It was not the same as asking Patricia to prevent direct communication. I typed, "Did Owen tell you he wanted to live with me?" The typing bubbles appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. "He needs stability, Naomi. Stop interrogating every word." I read it once, then again. No answer. Another message arrived. "This is exactly why Owen stopped trying with you years ago." A familiar ache opened beneath my sternum. Years ago. The phrase carried me straight back to being 17, standing in Rachel's hallway with my first college acceptance letter in one hand and Patricia's email open on the family computer. I had wanted to tell Owen I was leaving Oregon. Not because we were close. Because once, before concrete and hospitals and adults who spoke for us, he had been the person who taught me how to ride a bike. I had asked Mom if he might want to talk. She told me he didn't. For years, that memory had sat in my head, like a closed door. Maybe it was time to check who had actually locked it. Instead of answering Patricia, I took a screenshot of the entire exchange, including the time. Then I texted Rachel, "Are you home tonight? I need to ask you something about Mom and Owen." Her reply came almost immediately. "Come over." Rachel's house still smelled faintly of cinnamon and furniture polish. The front hall had changed since I was a child, but the staircase still creaked on the third step. She poured tea while I sat at the same kitchen table where I had once done physical therapy exercises with a towel rolled beneath my elbow. "What happened?" she asked. I slid my phone toward her. Rachel read Patricia's messages. Her eyebrows drew together. "Did Owen say that?" "No." She pushed the phone back. "Then why would she? Did Mom ever tell you Owen didn't want contact with me?" The question stopped her. Rachel's hand remained around the mug. She said contact was hard on both of you. "That isn't what I asked." The same precision I used with patients sometimes made people uncomfortable outside work. I no longer cared. "Did she specifically tell you Owen didn't want to see me?" Rachel looked down. "Yes." "How often?" "I don't know. More than once." "And you believed her?" I had no reason not to. My jaw tightened. "Did a therapist ever tell you we were supposed to stay apart?" Rachel looked up. "What? Did a doctor, psychologist, social worker, anyone involved in my recovery ever tell you Owen and I shouldn't have contact?" I thought they had. "Did you hear them say it?" Her face changed slowly. "No." "Did you see it written anywhere?" "No." The clock above the stove ticked once. Twice. Rachel rubbed her thumb along the handle of the mug. "Your mother always said she would handle Owen and I should handle you." The sentence was so ordinary that it took a moment to land. "Say that again." She'd say, "I'll handle Owen, you handle Naomi." At the time, it sounded practical. You were living here. He was with them. 2 children after one disaster. Divided cleanly. One handled here. One handled there. Except children grew up. Apparently the arrangement hadn't. Rachel reached toward me, then stopped before touching my arm. "I'm sorry." The restraint mattered more than the apology. I should have asked more questions. Anger burned through me, but it didn't feel like the anger I had toward Patricia. Rachel wasn't asking to be excused. She was naming what she had failed to do. "If you remember something," I said, "tell me what actually happened. Not what you think Mom meant. Not what you think she was trying to do." Rachel nodded. "Okay. And don't call her about this." Her eyes lifted. "I wasn't going to." Good. That was another small boundary. Maybe small boundaries were how people eventually built doors. Before leaving, I asked if Rachel still had any of my old belongings from high school. "Most of them are in boxes upstairs." "What about the old computer?" "Gone years ago." That should have ended it. Then I remembered something. The family email account. Rachel had helped me create my own address before college because I was tired of using the one Patricia monitored. My old account still existed. Back home, I opened my laptop. The password took 3 tries. On the 4th, an inbox from another life appeared. College newsletters, old store receipts, messages from classmates whose faces I barely remembered. I searched Owen's name. Hundreds of irrelevant results disappeared when I narrowed the dates. Then, one subject line appeared. Owen. My mouth went dry. I opened it. My original message was underneath Patricia's reply. 17-year-old me had written, "Mom, before I leave, can you ask Owen if he'd be willing to talk to me? I don't want to just disappear without saying anything. If he says no, I'll respect it." Patricia's response had arrived the next morning. I spoke to him. Owen has asked us to respect his wish not to revisit what happened. Please don't make this harder for him. He carries enough guilt already. Sometimes loving someone means leaving them alone. I had remembered the meaning. I had forgotten the exact words. There it was. Not an implication. Not something I had invented. I spoke to him. Owen has asked us. My mother had claimed direct authority. I forwarded the email to Owen with one sentence. "Did you ask her to send me this?" The reply came almost instantly. "No." Then another. "I never saw your message." I stared at the screen. A third appeared. "Give me 10 minutes." I walked to the sink and washed a clean glass that didn't need washing. 10 minutes became 12. Then my phone chimed. Owen had sent a screenshot. The message was old. Same year. Only a few weeks apart from mine. Patricia's name appeared at the top. "I know you want to contact Naomi before she leaves for school, but she's asked us to tell you she doesn't want to reopen that relationship. Please respect what she needs. Pushing her because you feel guilty would be selfish." My hand tightened around the phone. Same structure, different child. To me, Owen needed protection from my presence. To Owen, I needed protection from his. And Patricia stood between us, translating silence into rejection. I called him. He answered on the first ring. "She told you I said that." "Yes. I never did." "I know." "No, Naomi, you don't understand. I asked about you." The room seemed to tilt, though nothing moved. "How often?" He exhaled. "A lot when we were younger. Less when I got older." "Why less?" This time he didn't hide behind exhaustion. "Because after enough years of being told you didn't want me around, I stopped asking." That answer could have invited sympathy. It didn't erase anything. "You became an adult." "I know." "You could have found me." "I know." "You had social media, Rachel's number." "My email was never exactly classified information." "I know." The repetition irritated me. "Stop saying you know." "Then what do you want me to say?" "The truth." His breathing was audible through the phone. "Finally," he said. "The truth is, it was easier to believe Mom." That shut me up. Not because it absolved him. Because it didn't. He continued. "They paid for school, helped me with rent. Dad got me my first job interview. Every time I screwed something up, they stepped in. And every version of you they gave me made me the one who was supposed to leave you alone for your own good." My thumb traced the edge of the table. "So you did." "Yes." The answer hurt. At least it was honest. Owen cleared his throat. "I'm not asking you to forgive that." "Good. I'm also not asking to stay at your house." "Also good." A faint, humorless laugh passed between us. Then he said, "We should probably talk in person." The suggestion made every muscle across my shoulders tighten. 20 years of avoiding one another could not be repaired over coffee. I didn't want it repaired yet. I wanted it examined. "Okay," I said. "But there are rules." "Of course there are." "Mom and Dad aren't there." "Agreed." "You don't tell me what Mom said I felt. I don't tell you what she said you felt." "Agreed." "And if either of us wants to leave, we leave." A pause. "Agreed." We chose a quiet cafe near his rehabilitation unit for 2 days later. Then Owen said my name again. Something in his tone made me stay on the line. "There's one more thing." "What?" "It's about the earthquake." My left hand tightened involuntarily. Even after all those years, the scar along my forearm seemed capable of waking before the rest of me did. "What about it?" "They told you something wrong." The kitchen blurred at the edges. "Who?" "Mom. Dad, both of them, I guess. My chair scraped against the floor as I sat. Owen. I remember more than they said I did. Every sound in the room disappeared except his voice. He swallowed. Naomi, I didn't want them to choose me. My parents left me to die in an earthquake at 6 to save my brother 20 years later. They begged me. Naomi, I didn't want them to choose me. For several seconds, all I could hear was the faint electronic hum on Owen's end of the call. My left hand had curled around the edge of the kitchen table without me noticing. The scar along my forearm pulled tight. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. You were 9. I know. You were trapped under a building. I know that too. His voice stayed low. I remember you screaming. I remember the rescuer asking which side they should lift first. And I remember telling Mom to get you out. My stomach tightened. No. Naomi. No. Don't give me the version that makes this easier for you. I'm not trying to. It makes you the good brother who tried to save me while everyone else failed. That isn't what happened afterward. And I know it. Something in his answer made me stop. No defense. No demand that I believe him. Just a sentence with an edge of accountability I hadn't expected. Owen continued. You said we were meeting. Meet me before you decide what I remember. The cafe near his rehabilitation unit was nearly empty when I arrived 2 days later. He had chosen a table beside the window. For years, Owen had existed in my mind as two people. The 9-year-old boy carried out of the rubble, and the adult son who appeared in photographs beside my parents while I learned about graduations, promotions, holidays, and birthdays secondhand. The man sitting in front of me fit neither version neatly. His right wrist was braced close to his chest. One leg stretched beneath the table, and 2 crutches leaned against the wall beside him. A paper cup sat just beyond the easiest reach of his good hand. Without thinking, my fingers moved toward it, then stopped. Owen noticed. You were going to move that. You can reach it. It would be easier if you did. Yes. He looked at the cup, shifted his chair, then pulled it toward himself with his left hand. It took him a few extra seconds. That was okay. When he settled back, he said, Is that what you do with patients? Sometimes. Make them struggle? Let them do what they can safely do. Sounds annoying. It usually is. The corner of his mouth moved. For one brief moment, I remembered him at 11 years old, trying to teach me how to throw a baseball after my arm had finally regained enough strength. Then the memory closed again. Owen looked down at his coffee. Mom told me you couldn't stand seeing me. The words pulled me back. When? After the earthquake. Then different versions as we got older. What versions? When I was a kid, she said, seeing me triggered memories of being trapped. Later, she said you blamed me because they saved me first. That's not what she told me. He looked up. What did she tell you? That you didn't want to carry my anger for the rest of your life. His face tightened. That sounds like her. So did some of the things you said on the phone. Like what? Not wanting to drag up old issues. Needing space. Not making recovery about the past. Owen stared at me. Then he said, Those are Mom's words. A strange pressure formed behind my ribs. 2 people who had barely spoken for years somehow knew the same phrases. The same explanations. The same reasons not to speak. Only the names changed. Owen turned the cup between his fingers. I knew you were still under there. My shoulders went rigid. Tell me exactly what you remember. He nodded. No embellishment. No speech. Just pieces. You were crying. I could hear you somewhere on the other side of the slab. A man kept telling me not to move. Then someone asked Mom and Dad which side to stabilize first. The cafe around me seemed to recede. Dust coated my tongue again. Brown shoes stood beyond a crack in concrete. I didn't understand the engineering, Owen said. But I understood one of us was going first. My thumb pressed into my palm. What did you say? I yelled for them to get you. Why? You were 6. That doesn't answer the question. You were smaller. You sounded terrified. And I thought they could come back for me afterward. His gaze stayed on mine. I remember telling Mom to get you first. A bitter laugh escaped me. You know how convenient that sounds? Yes. You could be remembering what you wish you had done. Yes. The answer was immediate. That unsettled me more than certainty would have. You're not going to argue. With what? I was 9. Memory isn't a recording. My fingers loosened slightly. He continued. What I know is that after they pulled me out, I kept asking where you were. Mom told me you were barely conscious. I wasn't unconscious. She said you didn't understand I was still trapped. I did. How can you be sure? Because I remember asking why they weren't going back. His jaw worked once. Dad kept telling me the rescuers were working on it. That sentence belonged to Owen's memory, not proof. I needed to keep the distinction clear. You understand I'm going to check whatever can be checked. Good. If something contradicts you, I'm not hiding it because this version makes me feel better. I wouldn't expect you to. A part of me wanted his story to be true so badly it frightened me. For 20 years, I had believed no one under that slab had chosen me. If Owen had tried, even as a powerless 9-year-old, then there had been one voice. One. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me angry, because comfort could be another way of becoming careless. Before leaving, Owen said, "There's something else." What? I'm not pretending I did everything right after that. At least we agree on something. He accepted the hit. I stopped asking about you eventually. Why? His mouth tightened. Because being told you didn't want me around was easier than finding out for myself. There wasn't enough time to unpack that before my next appointment. But the sentence followed me all afternoon. That evening, I went looking for something neither Owen nor Patricia could rewrite. The local library kept a digital archive of earthquake coverage. Search results filled my laptop screen. Photographs of broken buildings, interview clips, rescue retrospectives, anniversary stories. At first, nothing mentioned us beyond the basic facts. 2 children. Same collapsed residential building. 1 recovered early. 1 several hours later. Then I found an anniversary article written long before Owen's injury. A former rescue technician had been interviewed about the children he remembered most clearly. Halfway down the page, our last name appeared. My breathing slowed. The article did not contain a miraculous transcript. No quote saying Patricia had condemned me. No recording of Owen shouting to save me. Just one sentence. The technician remembered an older boy who had been extracted from the same section as his younger sister and who kept asking crews to go back for her. I read it again, then again. That did not prove everything Owen had told me, but it destroyed one thing Patricia had told me for years. Owen had known. He had asked about me. I saved the archived page, then printed it. The paper came out warm. My hands were not steady when I picked it up. Rachel answered when I called. Can I ask you something specific? Of course. Did you see Owen after they pulled him out? Briefly. Was he awake? Yes. Did he ask about me? The pause lasted long enough for my pulse to begin pounding. I remember him asking where you were. The room seemed suddenly too small. You remember that? Yes. Exactly what did he say? No. I couldn't tell you exact words. Everything was chaos. Did you hear him ask about me? Yes. Mom always said he didn't know I was still there. Rachel exhaled. She told me he was confused. That isn't the same thing. No. The call ended a few minutes later. No grand revelation. No confession. Just 2 independent pieces that pointed in the same direction. The article existed years before Owen needed anything from me. Rachel had no reason to make him look better. And neither source proved every word he remembered. That mattered. The next afternoon, I brought the printed article to Owen. We met in the rehabilitation lounge this time. He read the paragraph once, then a second time. I never knew this existed. Neither did I. He handed it back. So you believe me? I believe this. My finger touched the paragraph. It confirms you were asking about me after they pulled you out. That's what I told you. It doesn't confirm every word you remember before that. Owen leaned back. You really hate making anything simple. I spent most of my childhood being told a simple version. His expression changed. That ended the joke. This also means Mom's explanation doesn't hold up. Which explanation? That you were too disoriented to know I was still trapped. His gaze dropped to the floor. She told me you didn't remember much either. My head lifted. What? Whenever I asked why we never talked about the earthquake, she said you had fragmented memories and that bringing it up would confuse you. A sharp laugh left me. Of course she did. There it was again. To me, Owen had been too confused. To Owen, I had been too fragile. There was always a reason direct contact was dangerous. Always a person who needed protecting. Always Patricia, standing in the middle to decide how protection worked. Owen shifted carefully in his chair. I was 9 that day. Yes. I wasn't 9 forever. That sentence came from him before I could say it. My attention sharpened. He stared at his braced wrist. I know what you're thinking. No, you don't. Fair. He corrected himself. I know what I would be thinking if I were you. That's different. You're right. Again, no fight. So I gave him the question I had carried into the room. You had years, Owen. I know. You had phones. Yes. You had social media. Yes. You knew Rachel's name. Yes. You could have found me. His jaw tightened. I could have. Why didn't you? For the first time, he looked uncomfortable enough to turn away. Not physically. Something deeper. I waited. Eventually, he said. Because believing Mom was easier. My throat tightened. Explain. They paid for college, helped with rent. Dad got me interviews. When I messed things up, there was always a reason it wasn't really my fault. He rubbed his thumb slowly against the edge of the brace. And every time your name came up, Mom made leaving you alone sound like the decent thing. So you accepted that. Yes. You benefited from it. Yes. You never wondered whether I got the same kind of help? His eyes came back to mine. I wondered. But you didn't ask. No. That answer mattered more than an apology. Owen drew a breath. I didn't choose what happened under that slab, but I spent a long time enjoying what came after it. My hand went still around the article. The sentence hurt. It also gave me something I had never received from him. Responsibility without a request for immediate forgiveness. That's the first thing you've said that doesn't sound borrowed. He nodded once. Nothing was fixed. Nothing should have been. The brother in front of me was not the monster I had built in my head. He also wasn't secretly innocent. That was harder. Simple anger had rules. This required judgment. My phone vibrated while I was walking back to my car. Patricia, why are you meeting him again? Another message followed. He needs to focus on healing, not relive things he cannot change. Then a third. If his recovery suffers because you keep upsetting him, that will be on you. My feet stopped beside the driver's door. The accusation landed exactly where it was designed to land. Professionally, recovery mattered to me. Pain, fatigue, stress, setbacks. I spent my days helping people avoid preventable barriers. The old reflex rose before I could stop it. I'm not trying to hurt him. The sentence appeared on my screen. I deleted it. Another version. He wanted to meet too. Deleted. Why was I defending a conversation between two adults to a woman who had appointed herself gatekeeper? A pattern emerged beneath the messages. Owen was injured. Therefore, Patricia could decide what he needed. If I disagreed, I endangered him. If Owen disagreed, he was vulnerable. Either way, his voice disappeared. My thumbs moved. Anything about Owen goes through Owen from now on. Do not make arrangements with me on his behalf. Please communicate with me in writing. Send. The phone rang immediately. Patricia. Decline. Again. Decline. Daniel's name appeared next. Against my better judgment, I answered. Naomi, can you please stop escalating this? Dad, I asked Mom to stop speaking for Owen. Your mother is trying to protect him. He can tell me what he needs. He just had surgery. That doesn't make him unable to speak. You're digging through things that happened 20 years ago while he's recovering. Owen agreed to talk. He's taking pain medication. The implication was obvious. His choices counted only when they matched theirs. If Owen tells me he doesn't want contact, I'll respect it. Daniel Seahill. Couldn't you wait 6 weeks? That nearly got me. Wait. Someone else needs more. Someone else hurts worse. Your turn later. My turn had been later for 20 years. No. The word came out quietly. Daniel went still on the other end. No? No. I'm not asking Owen to process anything he doesn't want to process, but I'm also not accepting Mom's version of what he wants anymore. You know what this is doing to her. There it was. Owen's recovery. Patricia's distress. Every emotion in the room, except mine, became a responsibility I was expected to manage. I'm at work. Text me if there's something factual I need to know. Then I ended the call. My hand shook afterward. For once, I didn't take that as evidence I had done something wrong. That evening, Rachel forwarded a screenshot from the extended family group chat. Patricia had already built a new version. According to her message, I had promised to take Owen in and then withdrawn the offer after old resentment resurfaced. She wrote that I was making a vulnerable man choose between recovery and childhood grievances. Several relatives responded. This is not the time, Naomi. He needs his sister. Whatever happened before, he didn't cause it. That last sentence made my jaw tighten. It was true. At 9, he hadn't caused it. At 29, he still wasn't entitled to my house. Both things could exist. My laptop sat open beside me. The 17-year-old email. Owen's mirrored message. The discharge plan correction. The rescue article. Enough material to fill the group chat until nobody knew which screenshot they were looking at. For 5 minutes, sending everything sounded wonderful. Then another thought replaced it. That would make me Patricia. Speaking for Owen, using him as evidence in a fight, he should be allowed to enter himself. I sent the screenshot only to him. Do you want to answer this yourself? Several minutes passed. Yes, nothing else. The phone stayed face up on my desk while I made dinner. 10 minutes later, Rachel sent another screenshot. Owen had replied to the group. Naomi never promised to house me. Mom told me she had. I'm making my own recovery arrangements. Please stop contacting Naomi about what I need. 4 sentences. No accusation. No dramatic defense. Just facts. Patricia responded almost immediately. You don't understand how much she resents this family. Owen's answer came beneath it. Then let her tell me that herself. Something loosened in my chest. He had not chosen my side. That wasn't what mattered. He had chosen his own voice. My phone rang. Patricia. Declined. Again. Declined. Then the message arrived. You have no idea what you are doing to this family. For a long time, I stared at it. The rescue article lay beside my laptop. The old emails sat open on the screen. The hospital note was saved in my folder. 20 years of explanations had started losing their shape the moment Owen and I compared one sentence. Patricia's power had always seemed enormous. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it only required 2 people who never checked what she told them. My fingers moved across the screen. Not toward my mother. Toward Owen. We need to talk to them together. My parents left me to die in an earthquake at 6 to save my brother 20 years later. They begged me. We need to talk to them together. Owen's reply came less than a minute later. Agreed. That single word should have made me feel stronger. Instead, my stomach tightened. It was one thing to compare messages with my brother from the safety of my kitchen. It was another to sit across from the 2 people who had spent most of my life deciding what every difficult memory was supposed to mean. By the next evening, the documents on my dining table had multiplied into small, careful stacks. My email from when I was 17. Patricia's reply claiming Owen had asked for no contact. The message she sent Owen saying I was the one who wanted him to stay away. Her recent texts saying he had requested my help. The written confirmation that I had never agreed to become his discharge plan. The archived article, quoting a rescuer who remembered Owen asking Cruz to return for his little sister. Nothing dramatic. No secret recording. No magical document that explained 20 years in one paragraph. Just dates. Words. Contradictions. Things people had actually said. Rachel stood at the other side of the table, watching me place them in chronological order. Do you want me there? No. She nodded slowly. You don't have to do it alone. I know. That was different from needing her to do it for me. You were there after the earthquake, I said. If something comes up later that only you witnessed, I may ask you about it. But this conversation has to be mine. Rachel rested both hands around her mug. What if Patricia denies all of it? The question stopped me. For most of my life, some part of me had been waiting for my mother to say the right sentence. Yes, Naomi. That happened. Yes, I chose him. Yes, I kept you apart. As if my memories required her signature before they became valid. I looked down at the papers. Then she denies it. Rachel studied me. And what happens after that? That was the better question. Not what Patricia admitted. What I would do. I pulled a clean sheet toward me and wrote 4 sentences. Owen was not moving into my home. I would not provide his rehabilitation. Anything between Owen and me would go directly between Owen and me. If Patricia started answering for either of us, I would leave. The paper looked almost absurdly simple beside everything else. 20 years of history, 4 decisions. For the first time, the decisions mattered more. The meeting happened 2 days later, in a small consultation room near the rehabilitation floor, where Owen was still receiving care while his discharge options were being finalized. No hospital staff attended. No one needed to. This wasn't a clinical meeting. It was 4 people in a room with nowhere left to hide a sentence. Owen was already seated when I arrived. Patricia sat beside Daniel across from him. She had arranged the chairs so there was an empty seat next to her. I moved it, not dramatically. I simply pulled the chair to Owen's side of the table and sat there. My mother watched me do it. No one commented. Patricia folded her hands. I don't understand why we're doing this right now. Her voice was controlled, almost gentle. Owen needs peace. Then let Owen tell me what he needs. Her eyes moved toward him. He's already told us he doesn't want. No. The word came out before she finished. Everyone looked at me. My pulse beat hard at the base of my throat, but my voice stayed level. No more speaking for him. Patricia's mouth tightened. I am his mother. And he is sitting right here. Owen adjusted his injured leg beneath the table. I never asked Naomi to take me in. Daniel shifted in his chair. Nobody said you formally asked. I turned toward him. Mom told me he asked for me. Patricia sighed. You're twisting language. Then untwist it. Her eyes snapped back to mine. Did Owen ask you to arrange for him to recover at my house? We were trying to solve a problem. That isn't the question. Daniel leaned forward. Naomi, this isn't a deposition. No, it's actually simpler. I looked at Patricia. Yes or no? She held my gaze for several seconds. No. There it was. Small, almost disappointing. 20 years ago, she had been able to decide which side of a concrete slab rescuers lifted first. Now it took effort to get one honest syllable out of her. I continued. Did I agree to let him live with me? You said you would help. I said I would help understand his options. That's semantics. No. Housing someone for 2 months and explaining his options are 2 different things. Patricia looked at Owen. You see what I mean? Everything has to be dissected. Owen's voice stayed quiet. She's right about what she said. My mother's attention returned to me. A familiar pressure formed behind my ribs. For years, the fastest way to make me doubt myself had been to make precision look like hostility. Too sensitive, too literal, too difficult. I opened my folder. Not everything. 1 page. The email I had sent the hospital. My consent had to be corrected because my address was provided before anyone asked me. Patricia barely looked at it. We thought you would say yes. There was more truth in that sentence than she seemed to realize. You thought I would. Yes. Why? Her expression shifted. Because he's your brother. So being my brother meant you didn't need my answer? That's not what I said. It's what you did. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Can we please not turn one bad assumption into a referendum on our entire lives? One bad assumption. The phrase stayed with me. A concrete slab. 20 years of silence. An email, at 17. A mirrored message to Owen. My home assigned without permission. Always one thing when viewed alone. That was how patterns survived. One thing at a time. I took out the 2 old messages. Did Owen ask you to tell me not to contact him before I left for college? Patricia glanced down. That was nearly 10 years ago. Yes. You were both young. Yes or no? She looked at Owen. He didn't rescue her from the question. I don't remember his exact wording. Owen spoke. I never asked you to send that. Patricia turned toward him. You were struggling. That isn't what she asked. A small tremor moved through my hands beneath the table. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Owen had just done something I had never seen him do as an adult. He had refused her translation. I placed his old message beside mine. Did I ask you to tell Owen not to contact me? Patricia read the first lines. Her face changed slightly. I was trying to keep both of you stable. That wasn't my question. You had no idea what those years were like for us. A bitter taste rose in my mouth. For you? Daniel cut in. Naomi. No, I want to hear this. Patricia pushed the papers back toward me. You both had nightmares. Owen carried guilt. You barely slept. Every time we let you two talk, one of you fell apart afterward. The room stopped. Not literally. The air conditioner still hummed. A cart rattled somewhere in the hallway. But every thought in my head narrowed onto 4 words. Every time we let you. I leaned forward. Every time? Patricia blinked. What? You just said every time you let us talk. Her jaw tightened. I meant when you were younger. So we did want to talk. That isn't what I said. You told me Owen didn't want contact. It was more complicated than that. You told him I didn't want contact. Because contact was hurting both of you. Owen's voice came from beside me. Then why didn't you tell us that? Patricia turned toward him. You were children. At 17? You were still vulnerable. At 20? Trauma doesn't disappear because somebody has a birthday. Nothing she said was completely ridiculous. That was what made it effective. Children could be traumatized. Young adults could avoid one another. Parents sometimes made decisions they genuinely believed were protective. But every explanation pointed toward the same result. Patricia decided who spoke. Patricia decided what we could handle. Patricia decided what the other person supposedly wanted. You knew we wanted contact, I said. Her eyes hardened. I knew contact was bad for both of you. The sentence settled over the table. Not a confession. She didn't say she had plotted to keep us apart. She didn't have to. The mechanism was sitting in front of me. She believed she had the right. Daniel leaned back. This is exactly why we didn't want to reopen everything. I looked at him. Because we might compare notes? That's not fair. Then explain what's unfair. The earthquake was chaos. We had seconds to make decisions no parent should ever have to make. There it was. The old door. Whenever the present became too difficult, Daniel took us back to the one moment where panic could explain almost anything. Seconds. Dust. Rescuers shouting. An impossible choice. I reached into the folder and placed the archived article on the table. Maybe you had seconds that day. Daniel looked at the paper. My mother didn't. How many seconds did you have during the 20 years after? Neither answered. My voice shook anyway. I let it. You had time after I was rescued, time while I was in therapy, time when I was 10, 15, 17, 21. Patricia's lips pressed together. Owen asked about me after they pulled him out. He was confused. The rescue worker remembered him asking crews to go back. People remember disasters differently. Rachel remembers him asking about me. She was traumatized too. Owen leaned forward. I remember asking. Patricia looked at him. You were 9 years old. So was I old enough to need protecting from Naomi, or too young to know I wanted her? Patricia opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. That was the first moment I felt the balance in the room change. Not because she had been defeated, because Owen had asked his own question. Daniel looked between us. We did what we thought was best. That line might have ended the conversation 10 years earlier. Maybe even 5. Not anymore. You're allowed to believe that, I said. You are not allowed to keep deciding what I remember, what Owen remembers, what he needs, or what I owe him. Patricia's expression sharpened. Owe him? Yes. How can you talk about your injured brother like he's an obligation on a spreadsheet? There it was again. My competence turned into evidence of emotional failure. I reached for the other paper I had brought. Not old evidence. A current plan. What Owen actually needs is temporary accessible housing, transportation, help with some daily tasks, follow-up care, and a rehabilitation plan determined by his clinicians. Patricia stared at me. And? There are multiple ways to meet those needs. I went through them slowly. Not clinical details. Choices. The short-term rehabilitation placement still being explored. Their house, if modifications and outside support made it workable. An accessible short-term apartment with paid assistance, if approved and available. Shared transportation. Outpatient therapy when appropriate. Owen listened. Daniel did too. Patricia waited until I stopped. Then she asked, and your spare room? Of course. The question landed almost softly, as if everything before it had simply been noise around the real issue. My home, my time, my work, the space they had already assigned. My home is not a discharge plan. Patricia stared at me. Naomi. No. You have the room. Yes. You have the training. Yes. And you would rather make your brother go to strangers? Owen moved beside me. I held up my hand slightly, not to silence him forever. Just this once. This answer belonged to me. I would rather let my adult brother choose his own recovery than turn my life into the price of his. Patricia's eyes filled. You really have become hard. The old version of me would have rushed to prove otherwise, listed everything I had done, explained that I cared, offered a compromise large enough to make the accusation disappear. Instead, I turned to Owen. These are your options. The paper slid across the table. To you, not Mom. He looked down at it. You don't have to decide in this room, I said, but you do have to decide for yourself. Patricia turned toward him. Owen. Obviously the easiest. He raised his good hand. Mom. One word. She stopped. He read the page, then took out his phone. I'm going to ask Marisol to move forward with the short-term option and see what gets approved. If that doesn't work, I'll look at the accessible rental setup. Patricia stared at him. You don't need to spend money on that. I need somewhere to recover. You have Naomi. The room tightened. Owen looked at her. No. Patricia's face went pale. I don't. He glanced toward me before continuing. I have a sister. That's not the same thing. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to look down. Not because everything between us was healed. It wasn't. Because for the first time in my life, the person my parents had built their entire hierarchy around had refused to use it. The meeting ended without reconciliation. That felt right. No hugs. No dramatic apology. Daniel said we were making permanent decisions while emotional. Patricia said very little after Owen chose his care path. My parents left first. Owen stayed seated while I gathered the papers. Are you okay? He asked. The question almost made me laugh. Not remotely. Same. I put the old emails back in the folder. He watched me. I meant what I said. About what? You being my sister instead of my plan. My fingers stopped on the folder. That doesn't fix everything. I know. You still spent years taking what they gave you. I know. You still have work to do. I know. I looked at him. This time you can keep saying that. A tired smile crossed his face. That was enough for one afternoon. By evening, Patricia had started telling the story again. Rachel sent me a screenshot from the extended family group. My mother had written, Naomi has been filling Owen's head with accusations while he's injured. She has convinced him we kept them apart and is now refusing to help with his recovery. We have spent 20 years trying to hold this family together. Please pray she remembers what family means before this goes too far. A month earlier, I might have read every reply until 2 in the morning. This time I skimmed. Some relatives told everyone to calm down. One asked what had actually happened. Another wrote that old wounds shouldn't be discussed during a medical crisis. Then Owen replied, Naomi did not convince me of anything. Mom told each of us the other didn't want contact. Naomi also never agreed to house me. I'm arranging my own recovery. Please stop contacting her about what I need. No one responded for nearly 5 minutes. Then Patricia wrote, You don't understand what we protected you from. Owen answered, Then explain it without telling me what Naomi thinks. Rachel's message came next. Patricia told me for years that keeping them apart was necessary. I accepted that and should have asked who had actually recommended it. I never saw an independent recommendation saying they should have no contact. That was all she said. No attack. No rewriting history. Just what she knew. The family chat changed after that. Not everyone turned against Patricia. That would have been too easy. A cousin still said parents sometimes had to make impossible choices. An uncle told everyone to handle it privately. But the questions were different now. Did Naomi actually offer the room? Did Owen really ask not to speak to her? Who told Rachel they had to stay separated? For the first time, Patricia's version was being treated as a version, not the record. Daniel called me. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. His voice was tight. Are you happy now? No. Your mother is devastated. I didn't post anything. You started all of this. I corrected a false discharge plan. You know what I mean. Yes. I looked out the kitchen window at the fading light. I started talking to my brother. Daniel exhaled. You've turned him against us. No. You have. He asked his own questions. After you put ideas in his head. The accusation should have made me furious. Instead, it clarified something. Even now, Daniel could not imagine Owen reaching a conclusion without someone else placing it there. If Patricia wasn't controlling him, then I must be. There was no space in their model for Owen to belong to himself. You should talk to him, I said. He won't answer. That's between you and Owen. You could fix that. My body went rigid. No. Naomi. No. I am not carrying messages between you. Then I ended the call. The next day passed without another message. So did most of the evening. At a little after 8, I was in the spare room sorting books I had been meaning to put on shelves when someone pounded on my front door. Not knocked. Pounded. Every muscle in my body locked. For one ugly second, the room vanished. Concrete above me. Metal striking stone. Voices outside a space I couldn't escape. Then I looked around. Books. Lamp. My walls. My floor. My door. 26. Not 6. The pounding came again. Naomi. Daniel. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. My father stood on the porch. Patricia was in front of him. At first, I thought she had dropped something. Then I realized why she was so low. My mother was on her knees. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Patricia looked up at me. Her face was blotched. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Please. I said nothing. Owen won't talk to us. Daniel stood behind her, with one hand on her shoulder. Patricia leaned closer to the narrow opening. You have to fix this. My parents left me to die in an earthquake at 6 to save my brother 20 years later. They begged me. You have to fix this. For a second, the words didn't make sense. Not because I hadn't heard them, because I had. My mother was on her knees outside my door. And somehow even now, even after everything that had come apart, she was asking me to repair something for Owen. The chain stayed latched. You came here for him. Patricia's face crumpled. We came here for our family. No. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. You came because Owen stopped answering. Daniel stepped closer behind her. Naomi, please. Your mother hasn't slept. That old machinery started turning immediately. Patricia's distress. Daniel's concern about Patricia's distress. Owen's anger. And somehow my role appeared right on schedule. Absorb it. Smooth it. Make the room easier for everyone else. My fingers tightened around the edge of the door. Patricia lifted both hands. We made mistakes. It was the closest thing to an admission I had ever heard from her, without forcing the words out one at a time. For one dangerous heartbeat, 6-year-old me leaned toward it. Then Patricia continued. But we were trying to protect you both. There it was. The same sentence wearing new clothes. You don't get to use that word anymore. She stared up at me. What word? Protect. Daniel's mouth tightened. That's unnecessary. No, it's specific. Patricia shook her head. You have no idea what it was like after that earthquake. My left arm had started aching. Not badly, just enough to remind me that my body still carried its own version of the story. I know what it was like from where I was. That isn't what I mean. I know. Her eyes filled. We thought keeping you apart would stop you from hurting each other. You never let us decide whether we were hurting each other. You were children. And when we weren't? No answer. A car passed at the end of the street, headlights sliding across the porch and disappearing. Patricia looked smaller after the light moved on. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. My mother finally desperate enough to come to me. My father unable to defend what happened. Me standing tall while they understood what they had lost. The fantasy always ended with me feeling powerful. Reality felt sadder. Not weaker. Just sadder. Because Patricia was still asking for the same thing. Not forgiveness. Access. Please talk to Owen, she said. You can talk to him yourself. He won't answer. That is his answer for now. He's angry. He's allowed to be. He's injured. He's still allowed to be angry. Daniel stepped forward. This is going too far. My eyes moved to him. What is? Cutting us off over old messages. Is that what you think this is? You've turned every mistake we made into proof that we never loved you. The words hit harder than Patricia's pleading. Maybe because Daniel had always been the quieter one. The person who stood beside the damage and renamed it. I looked past him for a second. 20 years ago, under rubble, I had heard my father say my mother's name after she chose Owen. For most of my life, some part of me had preserved that single hesitation as evidence. Maybe he had wanted to choose me. Maybe he had been too overwhelmed. Maybe he had disagreed. Maybe. Then came 20 years. That was enough time to stop hiding behind 1 second. Dad, you keep talking about what happened under the building because it was the one moment when you truly had no time. His face went still. You had time afterward. Naomi, you had years. Patricia tried to interrupt. I kept looking at Daniel. You watched Mom speak for both of us. You let her tell me what Owen supposedly wanted. You let her tell him what I supposedly wanted. I didn't know every conversation she had. No. But whenever I questioned anything, you told me not to upset her. His jaw tightened. I was trying to keep peace. For whom? He looked away. That was enough. Patricia reached toward the narrow opening in the door. Please, sweetheart. The word made my stomach turn. She hadn't called me that in years. Maybe decades. I looked down at her hands. No rings except her wedding band. Fingers clasped as if prayer could become leverage. You want me to call Owen? Yes. You want me to tell him what? That we love him. Tell him yourself. He won't listen. So, you want me to make him listen? Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. That's what this is. No. Yes. My voice finally shook. You left me under concrete to save him. Then you spent 20 years telling me he didn't want me. Now that he finally knows what happened between us, you came to the daughter you left behind and asked her to save your relationship with the son you chose. Patricia's face went pale. Daniel said, "That isn't fair." A laugh escaped me. Small. Almost tired. No. I looked at both of them. It finally is. My mother started crying harder. For once, I didn't open the door wider. Naomi, we are still your parents. That was supposed to mean you protected me. Her shoulders shook. It never meant you owned my answer. Patricia whispered. So this is it? The question hurt. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I did. For now, yes. Daniel stared at me. What does that mean? It means do not come to my house. Patricia flinched. Do not contact my workplace. Do not use Rachel to reach me. Do not ask Owen to carry messages between us. My throat tightened. If I decide I want contact later, I will make that decision. Patricia shook her head rapidly. You can't just erase us. Something inside me settled. No. I looked directly at her. I can stop letting you erase me. Then I closed the door. The lock clicked. The chain slid free. My hands started shaking so badly I had to lean against the wall. There was no triumph. No sudden calm. Through the door, I could hear Patricia crying. Daniel said something too low for me to understand. Then their footsteps moved away. A car door closed. Another. The engine started. I stayed against the wall until the sound disappeared. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. Rachel came over 40 minutes later. She didn't hug me immediately. She stood in the entryway and asked, "Do you want company?" Yes. What do you need? The question almost broke me. Not because it was profound. Because nobody was assigning the answer. Nothing fixed. Rachel nodded. Okay. We sat at my kitchen table. No advice. No speeches about strength. She made tea and pushed the mug within reach. I wrapped both hands around it. After a while, she said, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Not all of it. That's fine. They came because Owen won't talk to them. Rachel's mouth tightened, but she didn't interrupt. They wanted me to fix it. She looked down at her tea. Of course, she understood what that meant. For years, Rachel had watched people call me whenever something needed absorbing. You said no? Yes. How did it feel? That question was harder. Like I'd buried something. Rachel waited. The part of me that still thought if they ever begged enough, it would mean they finally understood. My voice cracked. They didn't. Rachel reached across the table and left her hand palm up between us. I put mine in it when I was ready. No one asked me to forgive. No one told me blood was blood. No one said one day I would regret setting a boundary. For that night, sitting there was enough. The next several weeks were quieter than I expected. Not easy, quiet. Patricia did not come back. Daniel sent one email 3 days later. I did not open it immediately. That mattered. For most of my life, a message from either parent could seize the entire day before I even knew what it said. This one sat unread until Sunday afternoon. When I finally opened it, Daniel wrote that he hoped time would help everyone gain perspective. No apology. No acknowledgement of the false messages. No question about what I needed. I archived it. No reply. Owen moved into a short-term accessible rehabilitation arrangement after his care team and insurance finalized what was available. He told me himself. Not through Patricia. Not through Daniel. Not through Rachel. A text arrived late one afternoon. I got the placement. Moving tomorrow. I stared at the message before answering. Good. Let me know when you're settled. His reply came a few minutes later. I will. That was it. No request for me to pack his things. No assumption I would drive him. No emergency manufactured around my availability. The first time I visited, he was irritated. Not at me specifically. At everything. The narrow shower bench. The effort of getting dressed one-handed. A transportation pickup that had been late. The fact that opening a plastic container had somehow become a problem requiring strategy. He shoved the container toward the edge of the table. This is ridiculous. I almost reached for it. My fingers twitched, then stopped. Owen noticed. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Deciding whether to help. Yes. He looked at the container, then at me. Can you open it? The question was direct, not assumed. I picked it up and loosened the lid. Thank you. You're welcome. He stared at the food. Recovery sucks. Yes. You really tell people that? Not usually in those words. He laughed once. Then, his face tightened when he adjusted his leg. I could have stayed with you. You could have. It would have been easier. For you. He looked over. The sentence hung there. Then he nodded. For me. That was the difference. Not that Owen suddenly became selfless. Not that I stopped caring. The difference was that inconvenience no longer created ownership. A week later, he called in a terrible mood because a transportation schedule had changed, and he might miss an appointment. You know how to fix this kind of thing, he said. The words came out before he seemed to hear them. I waited. Owen stopped. Sorry. For what? That sounded like I thought you were supposed to handle it. You did. He rubbed a hand over his face. Okay, I did. New argument. No guilt. Want to know what I'd do? I asked. Yes. So I told him the first 2 calls I would make. Then stopped. He made them. Later that evening, he texted. Sorted. A ridiculous amount of satisfaction moved through me. Not because he needed me less. Because he was learning that needing help did not mean handing someone else the steering wheel. Rachel kept me loosely informed about the extended relatives only when I asked. Some believed Patricia. One aunt apparently said I had always been too unforgiving. An uncle insisted both sides should apologize. A cousin stopped commenting entirely. Nothing exploded. There was no public reckoning. Life rarely arranged itself that neatly. What changed was smaller. And, for Patricia, probably worse. People started asking questions. Rachel forwarded one message only because it referred directly to me. A relative had asked, Did Naomi actually promise to take Owen in? Patricia answered. She knew he needed her. Not yes. That mattered. Another person asked whether Owen had really requested no contact years ago. Patricia responded that everyone had been doing what was healthiest at the time. Again, no direct answer. Her sentences still worked. They just no longer closed the conversation. Owen eventually wrote in the group, I'm not asking anyone to choose between Mom and Naomi. I'm asking Mom to stop telling people what Naomi thinks and stop telling Naomi what I think. I read that twice. He wasn't defending me as a helpless victim. He was naming the behavior. That was better. Without my spare room and unpaid care, Owen's recovery had ordinary costs. Insurance covered some things. Not everything. He used part of his own savings. Our parents chose to help with certain expenses. They also had to arrange support through existing systems instead of moving the burden into my house. Nobody went bankrupt. Nobody lost a mansion. There was no financial miracle. They simply had to pay for some of the help they had expected me to become. That felt fair. About 6 weeks after my parents came to the door, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Patricia's handwriting. My name across the front. No return address trick. No threat. No demand visible from the outside. I carried it inside. For several minutes, I stood in the kitchen holding it. The old Naomi would have opened it before taking off her coat. Would have studied every sentence. Would have looked for evidence of regret. Would have rearranged her evening around whatever Patricia wanted next. Instead, I set the envelope on the table. Made dinner. Took a shower. Read for an hour. The letter stayed where I left it. Before bed, I picked it up again. My thumb slid beneath the flap. Then stopped. I asked myself one question. Did I have space for this tonight? No. The answer came without guilt. I put the envelope in a drawer. Maybe I would read it. Maybe I wouldn't. The important part was that Patricia no longer got to decide when her urgency entered my body. Months passed. Owen's leg healed enough for him to move normally again. His wrist took longer. He returned to his own place. We didn't become inseparable. That would have felt false. Some weeks we spoke twice. Some weeks not at all. There were still awkward gaps. Still moments when one of us said something that belonged to the old roles. He occasionally expected understanding, too quickly. I sometimes treated a mistake like proof that nothing had changed. But now we could correct each other directly. That was new. One Saturday afternoon, Owen came by my duplex. By then, the spare room looked nothing like the place Patricia had imagined for his recovery. I had moved in a desk near the window. Books filled 2 shelves. A floor lamp stood beside one comfortable chair. A plant Rachel gave me sat in the corner, somehow still alive despite my inconsistent care. The room had no emergency supplies. No temporary bed waiting for someone else's crisis. It was mine. Owen stopped at the doorway. You did something with it. Eventually. Looks good. Thank you. He didn't walk in. That was another thing I noticed. Months earlier, Patricia had mentally moved him into this room without asking me. Now he waited at the threshold. Can I ask you for something? My shoulders tightened automatically. Not much. Just enough. Owen saw it. He looked down for a second, then back at me. Actually, he adjusted the strap of the bag over his shoulder. Do you have the space for something? The question landed somewhere deep. For a moment, I was 6 again. Not trapped. Just remembering. A pocket of air under concrete. Barely enough room to breathe. A child learning that when space became scarce, somebody else would be chosen first. Then, the memory passed. My brother stood outside a room in my home waiting for an answer. Not demanding one. Not asking our mother to give it for me. Waiting. I smiled. I do today. Owen stepped inside. Not because he was the son they had saved. Not because I was the daughter who was supposed to sacrifice. Because I wanted him there. And for the first time in my life, the space around me belonged to me before anyone else decided what to put inside it.